Well, hello, everyone. I want to sincerely thank everyone for attending today's session. This is RRH3. My colleague and I are pleased to be at this session, sharing some resources and success stories. I'll be talking a little bit about the difficulties in obtaining real, useful data on homelessness and housing insecurity in rural communities, particularly in a post-pandemic world. And then following myself, Linda Bernecki will be talking a little bit about some of the outcomes that could be done with that data. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background about ourselves as an organization. We're the Rural Development Network. We're a not-for-profit organization that until last November was known as the Alberta Rural Development Network. Because of the work we've begun doing and the people we work with across the country, we decided to rebrand ourselves. Since our inception, however, we've been committed to addressing key issues in rural communities at the local level. And today we are not only a research organization, but also implementation experts. So we create innovative tools and resources, put them out for use, free of use to anyone who needs them, but then also provide expertise and capacity to implement those tools and advocate for those issues and help access funding. So our primary initiatives are dedicated to supporting communities in addressing their needs for things like affordable housing through our sustainable housing initiative, preventing and ending homelessness through our unique homelessness estimations process, which I'll be talking about today, attracting and supporting newcomers, developing agri-foods initiatives, and revitalizing communities through our rural revitalization program. We're also the community entity for reaching home funding for rural and remote Alberta. So that is everything outside of the 7 major centers in Alberta. So our mission is to facilitate, support, and champion rural community development through collaboration, research, and service provision. And so what that means is not only do we provide capacity and expertise to groups who need it on a cost recovery basis, but we want to enable groups to be able to do the work themselves by developing expert-informed, publicly funded, free-to-use resources for communities. So the reason we're here today is to talk a little bit about data. I have a feeling in recording this session in that a couple of weeks when it will air, many of us attending will know that there are, in fact, people in our communities experiencing some form of homelessness or housing insecurity. They might be clients of ours or neighbors. We might have job opportunities within the community that are much needed but remained unfilled because it's unaffordable to find housing in that community. This can be an issue even in rural and remote communities, contrary to what you might think. And so sadly, as we've seen many times before, anecdotal data is not often enough to move things forward on its own, even though, in an ideal world it would be. So local or provincial governments may remain unconvinced that addressing homelessness should be a priority, either in terms of funding or policy. And so really the first issue to getting an understanding of these issues is to collect the data. This can inform some of the policies that we would like our lawmakers to focus on. It can help secure funding for those who are experiencing homelessness or at risk, improve organizational planning, program development, and provide, at the very least, some demographic information to better understand who is facing homelessness and to identify where perhaps community resources are most needed. And in our work, we found that from community to community, the picture can actually look quite a bit different, more so than we would even expect, and I can go into those details and results towards the end. So how does this typically happen? Well, to those who are unfamiliar, I usually talk about some of the methods of data collection. In larger urban areas, for those organizations with the resources and capacity, you can often coordinate large groups of volunteers to go out into the community, survey those that are found to be experiencing homelessness. This is usually done over a 24 or 48-hour period, often centered around areas that are where those experiencing homelessness can be found. For example, downtown cores, missions, shelters, food banks, libraries, any sorts of points of access for services. And this is known widely as a point-in-time count. Smaller communities have undertaken point-in-time counts to varying degrees of success in the past. One of the challenges with smaller communities, especially those that are remote, is that they have fewer resources, fewer volunteers, and often a much, much larger geographic area to cover. And not only that, but many don't realize just how different homelessness can present itself in rural communities. And so I'm going to talk about that hidden homelessness, which I actually have to say I'm pleased that it's getting, seems to be getting more attention, especially in the last few years. But even so, if I were to do a poll and ask 10 people what they thought homelessness was, I think we could almost guarantee that we would get 10 different answers. If anyone's feeling brave, we can perhaps in our conversation at the end have a discussion on what those definitions are. There are a few that come from trusted sources on Indigenous homelessness and from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and talk about the states of living that people are in, and we can sort of deal with the academic fallout a little bit later. So practically speaking, homelessness really refers to a spectrum of housing insecurity that we see in our communities. It wouldn't surprise anyone, I think, to understand that there are those who are sleeping rough or camping, as we see on the left here, those living in emergency shelters or perhaps MAT programs, as my colleague Linda is going to talk about next. Those that are couch surfing, and so this is now starting to creep into that hidden homelessness territory where it's very difficult to enumerate people in this way if they are in fact couch surfing. But even some definitions of homelessness kind of bleed into that core housing need that CMHC talks about, so having inadequate housing or not having the mobility to move out of inadequate housing due to affordability issues. So the spectrum covers quite a bit, and as you can probably imagine, volunteers going out into a diverse and geographically spread out community over a 24-hour period are not going to be able to capture all of these issues on the spectrum. Those couch surfing, sleeping in vehicles, staying with friends, fleeing domestic violence quite often are very difficult to enumerate, and so we'll have to figure out some alternative to this process. So I won't pretend I have a solution that one size fits all, but I do really want to talk about what we've seen to be successful in some of our smaller and remote communities. So if individuals are difficult to enumerate, after listening to communities, we really discovered that the best solution was to have service providers work with clients directly. So instead of going out into the community, as people come in for services, their information is then captured. And so this method is called a population estimation academically. So in 2017, initially, after a lot of consultation with communities and working in the space for a little bit, we got funding to put together the step-by-step guide to estimating rural homelessness. This was revised in 2019 with some more funding from ESDC, and we were very fortunate to be awarded both the Gold Roof Award from CMHC as well as the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association's Community Builder Award for this work. And this is, of course, one of those resources that I was mentioning that we like to put out free of charge. It's available not only on our website, ruraldevelopment.ca, but also on CMHC's resource page, as well as the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness is resource page as well. So all this work is publicly funded, as I said, and today I thought, though, rather than going into what's already in the guide, I can give you a bit of an inside picture as to the process, sort of how it was developed and how we came to some of these conclusions and how we're continuing to modify things and some of the results that we've seen in a few of our most recent projects. So the guide itself will take you through the process. It breaks things down into steps. At the end of each step is sort of a checkpoint to see if your organization is ready to move forward and if you're going in the right direction or other things to consider. The number of steps is shown in front of us here. There are some examples of, oh, pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So these steps here are located in the guide. Of particular note, I'd love to be able to talk a little bit about the training, so step 4. That was very much I would say an interesting challenge to overcome in the projects that we were partnered on during COVID. So we're not out of the woods yet, obviously, but you know, we had a province-wide in Alberta project in 2020 that necessitated sort of a unique method of training and delivery of the survey. We try not to be too prescriptive with communities. We don't want to be the outsider telling communities how they should be offering the surveys. And so we provided a number of methods, one of them being the survey on paper. So as clients come into service providers, they're able to fill it out there. Um, uh, uh, Either with the help of the service provider or the frontline staff, or the clients themselves can complete it. But we also provided an online portal for completing the survey, and this sort of served two purposes. So firstly, it gives a little bit of flexibility to the staff in terms of how they're presenting the survey. We recognize that often clients are coming in with you know, high needs and urgent needs that need to be addressed very quickly, and so it's very not constructive and perhaps inappropriate to sort of ask them to complete a survey right up front. So surveys are always offered after the service is provided, but then with an online portal, the client can then take home a URL or a code to access the survey later. And then the survey can also be then offered in public forums, and the word can be spread on Facebook pages and that sort of thing. So I'll talk a little bit about the methods we use to keep the data integral in those means, because we don't, we want to know who's filling this out and keep away detractors and that sort of thing. So I'll talk a little bit about our past projects. First, I want to go way back to 2017 when the guide was being developed. We did a pilot out of Rocky Mountain House in Alberta with the Mountain Rose Women's Shelters Association. It's just an hour and a half sort of southwest of Edmonton. So what we did is a standard point in time count along with an estimation method. This was in September, I believe, of 2017. The point in time count actually ran 2 days, and the estimation period was open for 2 weeks. So for the standard point in time count, they had a lot of volunteer hours, I think over 700. Unfortunately, they did get snowed out, and that is a drawback of that limited window. And 11 surveys were conducted. 2 of those were identified to be in unstable living situations, according to the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness definitions. With the estimation guide, 57 surveys were able to be delivered by frontline staff at service provider locations, with 44 people identifying as having an unstable housing living situation. And so that, as you can see, was quite a bit more successful. Now, I should say, in fairness and transparency, the weather was an issue with the point in time count, but again, having the survey being offered over the 2 weeks sort of is a great way to mitigate some of that those weather factors there too. So so that we were really pleased with it. It sort of showed the guides. That was the baby steps in terms of showing the method's efficacy. We've done several projects since then. In 2018, we did a project with 20 communities, and those results we've reported on in the past. And we actually did a follow-up project in 2020. This is the series of projects we did during COVID. We put out a call for expressions of interest and received interest from past participating communities as well as new ones. And so here's just sort of a quick list of the communities who participated in our enumeration during that time. We were pleased to have quite a variety of communities there, and populations ranging from almost 100,000 people down to just about 2,000 people in the community. One thing I wanted to mention is we're always, I think, as a community as well, looking at enumerating those facing homelessness. I think it's important that we're always asking ourselves whether or not we're doing it correctly, or whether or not there's a better way to be delivering the questions that we want to ask. So it's one thing for myself, for instance, to ask a question on paper, but it's very much a different thing for a frontline staff person to deliver that question. And we're always looking for ways that we can make it not only more appropriate, but also to be able to really get at the information we want without having to navigate stigma and that kind of thing. So a great example of this is that in 2018, we had asked on the survey very plainly, do you consider your living situation to be unstable? Yes, no, unsure. Those were the response options. We found, interestingly, and a lot of feedback from frontline staff, that that actually wasn't a great way of identifying those facing homelessness, because not only because of the stigma, so it's possible people, perhaps knew that they were in a homelessness situation, but didn't want to express that. But the frontline staff member knows, because they have that working relationship, that they are indeed living that way. But also uh, the um, the definitions of homelessness, as we talked about a little earlier, vary depending on who you ask. So someone might say, well, like I'm staying with a friend, but, and it's temporary, and, I have nowhere else to go, but I have a roof over my head. So no, I'm not facing homelessness at all. So what we did to revise that, both in our revised edition of the guide and also in the survey itself, is talk about um, just objectively what living situations are people facing. And again, these are drawn from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness definitions, and allow people just to straight up indicate how they're living. And then on the back end of things, we can identify, all the definitions and all that kind of stuff later on. So that was a welcome change, I think, with us. The results of this project are available on our website. I can just give a little bit of a rundown here. So across 24 participating communities, we had almost 1,900 housing insecure respondents, as well as they indicated almost 1,000 cohabitating adults and 769 cohabitating dependents. So that actually brings us to a total of 2,637 total individuals found to be housing insecure, so anywhere along that spectrum. And those would include, if we break them down, specifically 316 unsheltered, 208 emergency unsheltered, 409 emergency, that should say provisionally accommodated, 409, and 1,704 at risk of housing conditions. We asked individuals to give us some qualitative data, and this is just a word cloud indicating some of the most common responses to what is the reason that you are visiting the service agency over the course of this period. Here we have some data highlights. I just want to say that almost 2/3 of the people who responded to the survey were women. Almost half the people who filled out the survey were analyzed as living in unstable housing conditions. Interestingly, of the 908 people that identified as living in unstable conditions, 211 of them reported that they felt their housing situation was in fact stable. So they answered that yes, or pardon me, no, my housing situation isn't unstable. But then perhaps later on identified that they were sleeping rough, or they were sleeping in their vehicles, or that sort of thing. So again, that goes to show how much that stigma is a factor quite often. And just one other thing I wanted to touch on. Most of the respondents who were analyzed in living in unstable housing situations, oh, pardon me. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to go on to the next slide here. So I want to break down some of the common respondent profiles into those categories. So on one end of the spectrum, we have those that are at risk. So perhaps they have a roof over their head, but they are struggling with affordability or housing conditions and that sort of thing. So typically this was someone around 45 years old, most commonly a woman, living in the community for quite a long time actually. And again, they're facing that affordability issue and that suitability issue. When we look at some of the quotations from the survey, because we love to collect qualitative data, these are some of the things that individuals were telling us. When we look at those who are provisionally accommodated, they're most commonly women, again, about 34 years old, living in the community for over a year and often their whole life. And when we look at some of their anecdotal information, this is what they told us. Those who were emergency sheltered were overwhelmingly the most mobile group, often having moved 6 or more times over the previous 12 months. This is what they had indicated to us. And those who are unsheltered were most commonly men. It was common for respondents to be seen to be sleeping in their vehicles, and this is what they, just some of the select quotations from the surveys that they had provided us. I understand, just for the sake of time and going through these a bit quick, if you do want to see the full reports, those are also available on our website under publications. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some outcomes. And one of the projects that we had worked on is Conklin Alberta. You may have heard of it in the news. Very inadequate housing supply, severe unemployment. It's located probably just about 45 minutes to an hour south of Fort McMurray. There are a lot of inconsistencies in the data, just because of the lack of organizational capacity. In the region, the data varies widely, and so what we had to do is have a bit of a customized approach. We actually knocked door to door, delivering the surveys that way, just so we could get a sense of the housing conditions and situations that people were living in. As a result of that, that was a contributing factor, I should say, to Cenovus Energy's decision to do a 5-year, $50 million housing program that included communities in the region. So we were very happy to see that move forward there. So just to wrap up, I want to say thank you for your attention today. And if you are interested, please check out the publications page on our website, or contact us if you want more information. I'm always happy to take a call and talk about potential projects, or even just talk shop academically and trade notes and that sort of thing. So feel free to reach out. And again, I just wanted to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to discussing more with you in the future. Thank you.